It is truly an honor to be inducted into the Bengals Ring of Honor to join some great players and, of course, the great history that we have achieved as a franchise. So, with that, I just want to say I'm very happy to be going in. I look forward to seeing Chad on that night and celebrating our history together, and hopefully watching a great team like the Cincinnati Bengals this year add to the legacy of this already great franchise.
Boomer, congratulations on going in the Ring of Honor. Know it's something special for you, but talk about the moment you got the call and what went through your mind and your emotions.
I got the call from Mike Brown directly. Mike's a very low-key guy, as we all know. He said he was very happy to announce and to tell me that I was going into the Ring of Honor. And in true Mike Brown, very just kind of laid back fashion, he says, "You deserve to be here. We owe you a lot." And he made me feel great about the honor. And I never really thought it was going to happen, but here I am some 39 years after the day that I was drafted. And it's really kind of a surreal feeling, to be honest with you.
Thank you.
Boomer Seg here. Congratulations. What's your thoughts? Some highlights of you as number 7 back there as quarterback for the Bengals.
Well, Seg, it feels like another lifetime ago. And when you and I and everybody at 700 WLW and certainly all the TV stations that were covering us, it was a wild time back in the 80s and the early 90s for sure. I have a lot of great memories. Those memories include my rookie year, where I didn't understand a thing that I was doing, to the 1987 strike year, to the 88 Super Bowl year, to our next foray into the playoffs and beating Houston at home as significantly as we did. And then the great coaching staff we only had 5 coaches on that staff. Which was the offensive coach who of us as quarterback round. He was also obviously our head coach, Bruce Coslett, Johnson. And they had quite interesting. I've did Monday Night Football for 20 years games, and I'd watched the home teams honoring their past and watching the home teams honoring players and teams of the past. And the Bengals have done some of that. I know they honored our 88 Super Bowl and the 82 Super Bowl team. But they never really ever did anything in regards to recognizing and remembering the great history of players that they have. And I do believe that the team has turned the corner over the last 3 to 4 years, and there's a new emphasis on trying to reunite the older players with some of the newer players, the older fans with the younger fans. And it's great to be going in now because the team is so good and because they do have a great quarterback in Joe Burrow. And, I would tell you 5 years ago, I would have never thought this day was happening. But now that it is happening and the Ring of Honor is up and running, I know it creates some angst for some other players that do believe that they belong in, and they all do belong in, by the way. It's just that their time is coming, and like me, we had to wait. So that's why I never really thought it was going to happen until I actually saw Anthony Munoz step on that field that first time with Kenny Anderson and those guys going in, and the list of players that are already in make me realize that we are now on the right path to recognize the legacy of the players who have played for the franchise.
Hey, Boomer, it's Jeremy Ralph, Fox 19. Do you have a favorite memory from your time in Cincinnati you could share?
I had a lot of favorite memories on the field. I mean, winning the AFC Championship game, of course, against the Buffalo Bills and running off the field in the arms of my backup quarterback, Mike Norseth, that day was one I'll never forget. I do remember a game in which I played my rookie year, and I think I threw the ball to Chris Collins for 35 times that game, whether he was open or not. And I remember on that Monday morning, I sent a masseuse to his house, and he answered the door, and he turned the masseuse away, said, "Nobody can touch this body today. It's so beat up." So I might have led to his, quick demise, if you will. But at the end of the day, there's so many great memories and so many great teammates, even in the down years. You go through it with a group of men, and you realize that it doesn't last very long. So you learn as you get older that you don't take it for granted. And I've often said that my final year in Cincinnati, in those final 5 games, were some of the most fulfilling football that I had ever played, because of the young players that were on that team, and watching those young players finally figure out just how truly good they could be, and bringing those players to the forefront. So, it's been such a long time since I played. Thinking back on those last 5 games, it was a great way for me to end it.
Boomer, the way you guys played offense back in the day, before the Jim Kelly red gun offense, obviously there was the sugar offense and the tempo that you guys brought to the NFL offensively. How much pride do you take in kind of helping to revolutionize the way offense is played in the NFL?
Well, I think anybody, would say that, they feel very prideful about that. And I always felt like Sam and Bruce were concocting different things to kind of keep me engaged and to keep pushing me mentally and requiring me to be, a leader on the field, both as a player and how to run practice. And then, of course, in the meeting rooms, and I'll never forget answering all the questions that Sam Weish would be asking me in front of the team. And you talk about pressure, you have to know the formations, the defenses, the checks, the audibles, the calls at the line of scrimmage, all the different code words we had. So, he was fun. There was never a dull moment with Sam. I can tell you that. And I don't know. It's great to reflect back on those days and to think what we were doing was cutting edge. And then when I look in today's offenses and I see the tempo that some of these offenses play with, to me, that's what we were all about. It was all about tempo. It was always about trying to keep the defense on their heels. And never did I do that more with the group of guys than I did my last 5 games that year. Because, and I tell people this all the time, I was running scout team as Jeff Blake was the starting quarterback. Jeff got hurt against Indianapolis and never really regained, that promise that we had seen from him, earlier in his career. So I took over, and I just went so fast, because when I was doing the scout team in practice, I was driving Dick LeBeau crazy, because I kept running the plays so fast and telling all the guys, "Look, I just want to get off this field. I want to get off this field. We're going as fast as we possibly can." And I remember my center, Derek Brill, saying to me in the middle of, I think, a Tennessee game on Thursday night, he goes, "You got to slow down. We're going to have a heart attack out here." And meanwhile, Corey Dillon is just running right through the Tennessee Titans. And Jeff Fisher asked me after that game, "What exactly were you doing in that game?" And I said, "Jeff, nothing really different other than just turning up the tempo." And that's when I really noticed how big of an impact that could have in a game.
Boomer, I think back a few years ago, and you're holding the Bengals helmet next to Joe Burrow before the draft on set there on CBS. And now, obviously, we know what he's done, what this team has done over the past few years. How enjoyable has it been for you to see their ascension and see how great they've been?
I actually did that to Carson Palmer too, as well. And I welcomed them both to our dysfunctional family for whatever reason. But and I said it in a funny way. And I said that, look, the one thing I do know, Mike Brown knows quarterbacks. He really does. And when you think about the quarterback and the stable of quarterbacks that the Bengals had, the stability at quarterback that the Bengals have had for most of their existence, it tells you that Mike knows exactly what a quarterback needs to look like, how that quarterback needs to act, and how he can get the best out of that player. Joe Burrow was a can't miss, prospect. We knew coming out of LSU he was going to be a superstar. I have to say that he has exceeded every expectation that I had for him coming into the league. I know people say that he's the second best quarterback in the league. I think he's pressing, Patrick Mahomes for that title of best. But until you knock the best off and you win a Super Bowl, I guess you necessarily can't claim that. But that's not who Joe is. Joe is, I would say, a humble player, but also a very fierce competitive player, which is why his teammates, I think, really do respect him. So going in under these circumstances with Chad, that Monday night should be a great night because this team, is one of the better teams in the league now.
Boomer, to that point about Joe Burrow, what you guys had with that 1988 team, how much of that do you see in this current Bengals team that, like you said, has just taken off in the last 2 or 3 years?
Well, I'll tell you, it's similar. I think that they throw the ball a lot better than we did. I mean, early in the season, we threw the ball really, really well in '88, and we were throwing the ball down the field with Timmy McGee and Rodney Holman and Chris Collinsworth and Eddie Brown and Ira Hillary. We had great stable of running backs with James Brooks and Ickey Woods and Stanford Jennings. We really had great players, and most of all, we had the biggest offensive line in football. And I'll never forget the second game in the '88 season at Philadelphia. That was the real test because they had the best defensive line in football. And our offensive line just absolutely gave me all the time I needed. And we hit so many big plays in that game. And then our running game took over late in the year. So I don't see that as the case with the Bengals here. This is a pass first team. This is aggressive head coach with Zach Taylor. They trust their quarterback to make the decisions at the line of scrimmage. And he is in such synchronicity, I should say, with his wide receivers, whether it be Jamar or T or any of the other players that he is playing with now. It shows you that Joe Mixon wanted to be a part of a winner by taking less money to stay there. And I think that speaks volumes to who this offense is, who the coach is, and then ultimately they know that they have a winning quarterback.
Boomer, kind of to touch on what you spoke about a little bit earlier about kind of not sure if this was going to happen. What's it been like to see the transition of this franchise over the last few years and kind of how they've kind of evolved recently?
Well, I think Elizabeth and Caroline have a lot to do with that. So the great granddaughters of the great Paul Brown are right in the mix, and their mom has taught them well. They're going to be great stewards of this franchise moving forward for many, many, many years to come, much like Katie has done. And the power she wields within the NFL, being one of the first women to wield that much power is really amazing. That's cutting edge, but you would never know that because nobody ever really talks about that. As like nobody ever really talks about the great Willie Anderson, who was a 4-time All-Pro football player. When I tell people that, friends of mine that, Willie was a 4-time All-Pro, they're like, really? I don't know why nobody knows that, but it's kind of like the way, Katie runs the team. Like nobody knows it unless you really pay attention to it. And there have been some articles written, but probably not enough. But that's not who the Brown and Blackburn families are. They're very low key, very under the radar, and they just want to run a football team and hopefully finally get a Super Bowl.
To that point, Boomer, are there things about the way the Blackburns and the Browns run the Bengals now that you can appreciate better outside of the game 20 years or whatever after you've played than you didn't back then?
Yeah, I mean, they've morphed into this century now of the NFL, and they've caught up. And when Joe gets his new contract, it's going to be earth-shattering for a lot of people to see. And this is a small market team. This is a family that doesn't have any other outside businesses other than the team. It was amazing when Paycor finally became the title sponsor of the stadium. And I don't know if they had to do that financially because ultimately they're going to have to pay a lot of these great players. But the league has grown so much over the last 20 years. And whether you like the commissioner or you don't like the commissioner, he has done well by a lot of these owners in terms of stadiums, in terms of revenue, moving the draft around, the Super Bowl popularity, the television popularity, the radio popularity, fantasy football. Now, of course, gambling's involved. So it has grown significantly, and the Bengals have grown with them. And they do have one of the best stadiums in the league. And when they do win, and they have great players like we did back in the '80s, and during Marvin Lewis's time there too, when they were winning with Carson Palmer and of course Andy Dalton, you saw the fans come out and support the team. And now the fan base is rabid because they have some of the best players at their respective positions in the NFL. So it's great to see that the Bengals are now catching up with everybody. And, and I know that Corey Dillon a few weeks ago said that he thought he should be in. Well, Corey should have been in 20 years ago. We're playing catch up. Everybody's playing catch up. And guys on that list that I was on with this year, whether it be Tim Crumry, Max Montoya, Lamar Parrish, any of those guys, David Fulcher, Chris Collinsworth, of course, all of those guys will get in and should be in. And it's a shame that we're not all in together at this time just yet. We just have to wait some more.
Hey, Boomer, when you think about Sam Weiss, obviously he meant a lot to you, but is there another coach that maybe we don't know a lot about that to you really helped shape the quarterback that you became?
Well, Bruce Coslett, I think, Bruce Coslett was always the hammer. Like, people didn't see that when he was the offensive coordinator when I got there. And he was always the one telling me to keep my elbow up, watch the footwork. And, Sam would work on my footwork and all that other stuff, but he still had to be the head coach to everybody else. Bruce was the tough guy for me. And it's one of the reasons why when I did ask the Bengals to trade me after the 92 season, I wanted to reunite with Bruce in New York because I knew his offense and he knew me as a player. And I knew at that point in time in my career, the best thing for me would be to reunite with a guy that was going to be tough on me, that was going to coach me hard. I didn't realize he was only going to last 1 year here in New York, which was very, very unfortunate for me and him and his family. And one of the toughest moments in my NFL career was finding out that he was being replaced. So Bruce was very, very significant in my development as a player. And then later on in my career, when I came back to Cincinnati and he was the head coach, Kenny Anderson was the offensive coordinator and was the quarterback coach. And I cannot go without saying, if it weren't for Kenny and Turk when I first got into Cincinnati, I don't necessarily know that I would have known how to become a professional football player. I watched how they studied. I watched how they practiced. And I spent a lot of time watching Kenny drink Coors Light. So a lot of that stuff wore off on me. And I have to tell you, it was some of the greatest moments of my life being around those guys, especially when I came back.
Thank you.
Boomer, was it you always had your locker with the offensive line, and you kind of had a special relationship with those guys. Is that something you told Tom Gray? Always put me with the big guys, and maybe talk about that relationship with them.
Well, that comes back to my high school coach, Sal Ciampi. He was an offensive lineman for Purdue back in the 60s, and his quarterback was Bob Greasy. And when I became my high school coach's quarterback in high school, he used to tell me that, how Bob Greasy would handle things and how he would do things. And he just loved and admired Bob Greasy. So it was just a natural thing that came to me to be around the offensive linemen. I used to do their offensive lineman's prayer in high school that my high school coach taught me. And that prayer went, "We work the hardest, we're known the least, but who cares, for we are the reason." And that was back when offensive linemen weren't making any money. And the quarterback was making money compared to them. So I remember giving them Tiffany etchings with that prayer so they could have that and know how much I appreciated the hard work and dedication that went into doing what they did, because their practices didn't look a lot like fun to me, Jeff. They're over there slamming their heads against the sleds and all the different, kind of paraphernalia we'd have on the practice field, and then go over and try to fight with the offensive lineman for 2 hours in practice. It didn't seem like a lot of fun, but I just wanted always them to know that I appreciated everything that they did for us as an offense.
Did you always want your locker with them? Was that something you did?
Absolutely. I mean, offensive linemen are some of the funniest guys in the league, and I think we probably had the funniest. And his name was Brian Blados. There wasn't a guy in the locker room funnier than Brian Blados, and to think back to him and Joe Walter and Bruce Reimers and Bruce Kazerski and Dave Remington and Max Montoya and Anthony Munoz, and think of that group of guys. I mean, and to be in the meetings with them and to go through the walkthroughs with them and just to be around them all the time, it didn't get much better than that. And I used to watch film with them every Thursday after practice. I'd watch the end zone film, and we'd go over the checks and the defensive fronts, making sure that we were all on the same page about what plays we wanted to run, what pass protections we wanted. And that's one of the reasons I think why, Jimmy McNally goes down in history as one of the greatest offensive line coaches, because that offensive line was literally like a ballet group, the way that they would work their feet together and how they keep their shoulders together. And very rarely were they ever beaten because of a mistake, an assignment mistake. I do remember one time we were playing, I think it was the San Diego Chargers, and I held on to the ball too long, and I got sacked by somebody. I forget who it was, maybe Junior Seau, could have been, I don't know. And Max Montoya and I were laying both on the ground. He's looking at me and I'm looking at him, and he's screaming at me, "Throw the damn ball." And I learned a very valuable lesson that day, not to piss him off.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Boomer?
Boomer, I'll just ask you real quick about Chad Johnson and your thoughts of what made him such a legendary personality on and off the field.
Well, his performance on the field speaks for itself. He was one of the most difficult players to cover. And I think he had the right coach in Marvin Lewis. I think he could talk to you more about that than I can. It's like I felt that way about Bruce and Sam. I'm sure he feels that way about, maybe Hugh Jackson and also, of course, Marvin. So it was apparent to me that, when he was playing, he was like right there at the top. Owens and with Joe Horn and all those guys, and then they kind of took it to another level and they did all the celebrations and everything, which were, I think, fun for the fans. I think the fans really enjoyed it. And it's because of that group of wide receivers that we now see the NFL allowing these players to do their celebrations. So much like the no huddle offense was a trendsetter back in the 80s, I think Chad Johnson was a trendsetter when he played, and he basically opened the door for all of these players now to do all of their celebrations on the field after they score a touchdown.